I joined shortly after the project started, but it was basically Door International is a larger organization that works with the deaf, and they provide a lot of jobs in translation. It's actually a missions-based organization, and so they work with a lot of men, but the women weren't as interested in that work, and they wanted to provide more jobs for women, deaf women. And so they asked them, if you were going to work, what kind of work would you like to do? And they brought up jewelry. Like, they had a desire to learn how to do jewelry making. So they brought a woman in to train them on making the wrap bracelets. And that's sort of how the project started.
So you used to live in Kenya?
So I had been living in Kenya off and on since 2008, and I did a master's in development studies with a focus on artisan production. And I was basically in the process of returning to Kenya to finish my thesis, and it was on artisan access to e-commerce, so it was kind of fitting with what they were doing. And so I spent, in the last year and a half, I've split my time between Kenya and the U.S., and now I'm going to be basing in the U.S. and going back to Kenya just a couple times a year.
Okay, and why did you decide to show the profiles of women, of artisan women on the website?
I think because well, first of all, the women are really proud of what they do, and like the idea that their stories are being told, because they've spent their life being repressed and mistreated, and so to be able to get attention for what they can do versus what they can't is really empowering to them. Mm-hmm. And then, I mean, it's a marketing tool because it does help us to demonstrate that beyond, hopefully creating beautiful and desirable pieces, the people behind these pieces don't have an alternative means of income. Mm-hmm. So by telling their stories, we can demonstrate why their participation in this project is so important.
So are you going to do video with them as well at some point?
I mean, we would love to. It's just a capacity, time, and we had a guy come out and do some video, and he was supposed to put something together for us, and he hasn't finished it. I should probably email him. But the larger organization does a lot of video, but we're just tapped for time.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the Door International was the organization that sponsored this company, or what is the structure, by the way?
So we are a nonprofit doing business as Salsa Designs by the Deaf, and so we're technically the same organization as Door. What we'll be looking at in the next year is if we should separate and become an incorporated business entity, either a benefit corporation or a hybrid nonprofit for-profit hybrid. I had a meeting yesterday, and we're going to be talking with an attorney who sort of specializes in social enterprise to see what's the best setup based on our goal of raising money for the deaf, but largely focused on creating more jobs. And will we be limited if we stay part of Door, or how that needs to look?
Okay. And I really like the motto that you have there. It's deaf mm-hmm. artisans working in dignity. Mm-hmm. So do you have like a big marketing team, or you know what I mean? What is the structure? Yeah, there.
No, I mean, our administration, basically the bulk of our staff are deaf artisans. We have about 12 deaf artisans, and then we have a hearing assistant in Kenya, a Kenyan assistant who's proficient in sign language but is hearing, and she's actually on maternity leave, so we have a replacement for her that we're working with, also Kenyan, also hearing and sign proficient. Mm-hmm. And then there's me. I'm in charge of kind of the whole project. Mm-hmm. And then I have one American colleague who splits her time between Door and Salsa. And she does like accounting and order fulfillment and inventory. So marketing, design, strategy, business development, that's all on my shoulders. And I've been really lucky to have some really amazing people volunteer their time in a design capacity, in a marketing capacity, and in a business capacity. So, like my friend who's here right now has been helping with design and marketing. I have a guy in Kenya who's American, but he's helping me with budget. And so, um, hopefully we'll be able to expand our staff at some point, but right now we're pretty limited. So the Deaf Artisans Working in Dignity was one of the initial slogans that they came up with when they started the project, because a big focus is giving deaf people dignified work, not just giving them work, but giving them work that makes them feel like they're just like anybody else. And I read a great do you know Suno? Suno.
No.
It's a high fashion label. It's out in New York, and they produce in Kenya and India and a couple other places, but they're considered an ethical label. And I loved the way they described it. They basically said, when we visit our factories, we want to make sure, like, are the bathrooms a bathroom we would use? Are the tables that the people are working at something we would sit and work at? Like, you cannot say you're running an ethical or a fair trade business if what your artisans and workers are doing, you wouldn't sit and do yourself. And I think that's, for the way we run, that's what dignity means to us, not something that we're setting, like, we're sort of helping the deaf, but not all the way. Like, we really want to be providing dignified work that any person from any country or any skill or background would feel the
Yeah.
same in.
And what is the training process? How long does it take?
Typically, it's about 2 weeks. When we need to bring a new artisan in, basically we pay them a daily wage for 2 weeks. We give them lunch and tea, and then we train them on the different skills. And then when they're okayed by the lead artisan, then they start as like a full team member. And once they're a team member, we pay by the piece, so that they have a little bit more control over their earning power.
Yeah.
They can produce more and make a little bit more. And that's our structure right now. We're looking at it to make sure that that is equitable for everybody. But yeah, about 2 weeks, and then they're ready.
Okay. And did you have any challenges hiring these women? Did the government, I don't know, or something like that, some sort of organization not let you do that?
No, actually, the government in Kenya has done some work to actually support people with disabilities, and there's actually some programs that we could probably take part in a little bit more that, again, we just don't have the time to sort out. But the only challenges that we face governmentally sometimes relate as foreigners getting our work permits so that we can be there and kind of support that work. You have to really demonstrate that the work you're doing couldn't be done by a Kenyan. And so where our goal as an organization is to have as few jobs done by foreigners as possible, we are an organization that was founded in the U.S., and so that would be the only challenges we face.
And so how long did it take you to establish the company there?
I think they did training. The initial training was about the initial training, I mean, Jana, who did the jewelry training, came over for about 2 weeks. And then the women were working together for probably about 2 months before I joined. And I joined in January of 2012. So I've been with the project about a year and a half, and the project, it'll be 2 years in November. So, and we spent a lot of time in the last year focusing on operations and structure and, how to process orders, how to plan for orders, how to manage inventory. We still have a long way to go. It's really, really challenging, and there aren't a ton of tools available. But we feel like we're at a good place to start growing.
Yeah, great. And what would you recommend to a nonprofit or just a group of young people who want to start a similar project? And so, would you recommend them to align with a big company or big nonprofit or do it by themselves?
The benefit, I mean, why I agreed to join the project after having studied a lot of these groups, um, was in part because they were part of a larger organization and they had accounting systems in place, they had administrative staff in place. So we didn't have to invent the whole wheel. We just had to invent this business. But we had payroll through the larger organization already set up, and we had different things already set up. Not as many as I initially thought, because it turns out like the accounting, we had to come up with a whole new chart of accounts. But we at least had some structure, and a hierarchy, so we weren't having to create a whole new hierarchy. Like the organization already had a director and someone who was really well respected by the deaf community. So there is a benefit to partnering. I think more important is for sales, for organizations based on manufacturing and sales, a lot of people think that the key to success is finding markets. And I don't think that's the key to success at all. I think finding markets are actually pretty easy. It's logistics and inventory and systems that actually keep projects from going. So the best thing to do is to find local staff that are reliable, smart, trustworthy, and have computer skills, and really empower those local staff. That's critical for anybody who wants to start a project in the developing world. And I would say second is to get your systems in place before you start marketing or going for orders, because that's where things get stuck. There's a lot of people in need of jobs. The labor is not a problem. Production is not a problem. It's getting things from point A to B, and processing orders and accommodating timelines and getting materials. But people end up being your best asset. It's the systems and structures that keep projects back.
So ideas are actually, the execution of the ideas is actually more important than the ideas themselves, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
And, technology, identifying the technology that will facilitate your idea. Don't assume it's out there. It may not be. And get that in place before you've employed a bunch of people and designed a product, because it's heartbreaking. I've seen so many projects in Kenya and other countries, like people come in and they're like, oh, we're going to save the day and we're going to do this, and they launch something and then it's not sustainable, and suddenly all these people got their hopes up and they thought they had a job, and and then it's, in 6 months, the whole thing's done. So we're really trying not to be that project.
Okay.
Yeah.
And do you work with other nonprofits or social enterprises to, for collaboration or some sort of, partnership?
A lot of our buyers, our wholesale buyers are, we have, churches and community groups. Like we have a nonprofit that runs an orphanage in Kenya, and they have a little store in, I think it's in New Hampshire. And so they buy at wholesale from us, and then they sell at a markup, and they raise funds for their nonprofit. And then we have like a church gift shop that somebody started in North Carolina, and she's just got a huge vision, and she's really business savvy, and they're doing great business, and they're raising all sorts of money to support women's groups around the world. And then we have some catalogs. So a lot of social enterprises are buying from us as wholesalers and then reselling. So yeah, it's pretty cool.
So do you think you will also, Sasa Design will also buy from somebody else, and just try to support somebody else as well in the future?
If we can't, one of our structures is that for our raw materials, we try and buy from local groups. So like this new collection we're going to be launching in San Francisco and New York, all the brass and bone pieces are coming from a local brass maker who's a young Maasai guy who hires former street youth and trains them. So what I like to tell the women is that, you're getting assistance in the form of a job and an opportunity, but by doing that, you're also supporting your local economy and community. So each season we want to try and like identify and support another group. Next year it'll probably be a local glass blowing studio,
Mm-hmm.
which again provides jobs, um, for people in need. So that's something we're working on. And last season we only had one piece, but we bought it from a local women's group that works with women with HIV. So we do want to partner as much as we
Okay.
can.
And also, what is the best city in the U.S. to start a nonprofit like that or social enterprise and run it, and just find supporters, or partners and also a country, a country that you want to help out.
Yeah.
What is what is the easiest kind of
I mean, just easy is a not a word that goes hand in hand with
yeah.
this arena. San Francisco has a lot going on in social enterprise. There's the Hub, which is a social incubator and kind of social enterprise lab that has all sorts of networking events and shared workspace. And there's a hub in, I think it's called iHub, but there's one in Nairobi, there's one in New York, I think, Seattle, DC. I mean, it's not unique to San Francisco, but I'm in California, so I think of the one in San Francisco. Certainly a lot going on in New York, a fair amount going on in Seattle. Those are the three main cities I think of with social enterprise. In terms of location, I mean, the sky's the limit. There's lots and lots of places where the jobless rate is extremely high, and when it comes to people with disabilities, I mean, virtually anywhere in the developing world, you're going to find a much higher rate of unemployed people than here. And also, they don't have, almost any of the social support systems that we do here. So there's no disability payment or handicap programs or anything like that. So to me, you're working with the deaf is just an added level of need, basically. So because there's joblessness is extremely common in Kenya, but with this group, I mean, they say typical joblessness rate in Kenya is 50%. And that doesn't really include the informal economy, but amongst the deaf, it's 85%. So
What do you think is the future of social enterprises, for the next couple of years or maybe 5 years? And how do you see your enterprise there?
mhm. I mean, I just think there's never been a better opportunity. I mean, when I used to talk about social enterprise when I graduated from college, I got the same reaction over and over like, well, nobody will pay you to do things that are good for the world or good for people. And
Yeah.
now people realize that there are plenty of opportunities to make money. Maybe not at the profit margins that the private sector has taught us to expect, but sometimes at those profit margins or even higher, but still serve the community at large and address social needs. So there's tons of opportunities in areas like integrated waste management, water quality, energy generation. I mean, those are major, major industries where there's incredible need. And, the more technology becomes available, the easier it is to provide services in an ethical and responsible way. So we're in more of the luxury arena. We're creating jewelry that is not a need. It's not. It's not solving any social issues in the product itself, but it's in demand product from a consumer perspective, and I think it's also encouraging to me to see that consumers are really starting to care where things come
Mm-hmm.
from, and that big businesses are starting to offer more opportunities. I mean, when you go to Target or Costco, even Walmart.com has a whole fair trade program. And sometimes people think, oh, well, it's just for show. But the very fact that those corporations are actually starting to care and that there's enough consumer demand shows how far we've come. So I think in terms of opportunities, that again, the sky's the limit. It's continuing to innovate, continuing to get the word out, identify partnerships, hold corporations accountable, get
Yeah.
in front of them, and keep putting new products. And what's nice to see is that people are realizing that design is important. In the fair trade arena for a long time, people thought the story was enough by itself. And I've never thought that. I think a story should be an added bonus, but a
Yeah.
consumer always wants good quality and something that looks good, and you have to accommodate that. And I think, in my mind, that's the best way to honor the producers, because then you're honoring them as normal producers. You're not honoring them as like special producers by saying, well, we're going to let you produce something that's subpar, but because you're in need, we're going to find a way to sell it. I think it honors people to say you can produce something that anybody, to the same level of quality that is produced anywhere else, and we're going to sell it. And, at some point we won't need to tell that story. Hopefully it'll just be an equal playing field across the board.
Yeah. That's great. And how do you think the industry evolved for the last, I don't know, 5 or 10 years? This social enterprises and nonprofits, what ideas, like you were saying, right? You don't want to produce something just to show that people are in need, and ask people to buy it just because people are in need. So I think the ideas are evolving and become more sustainable, right? And so you've been working in this field for a while, and what is your perspective on this?
I think when the industry first started, it was either targeting people that had huge hearts and were willing to spend more for the sake of supporting a cause, or people who had enough money that they could afford to pay more in support of a cause. And I think now, especially with what the American economy has gone through in the last few years, you can't necessarily expect either of those things, because even the people with money are spending a lot more carefully than they might have a few years ago. And so, again, it's sort of made the arena less sort of charity and luxury based from the standpoint of, well, if we can tap into that top echelon, we'll be okay, and forced it to sort of follow general market dynamics. Well, we have to create a competitively priced product, and we have to create something that, gives someone an option where they can't say, oh, well, I can get the same thing at Target for cheaper, but that they can get for about the same price. They can buy it and feel good about it, or they can actually buy it and feel good about it, and it's still at Target where they shop anyway. There's been some groups that I used to work with, a group called Rwanda Partners, which has since changed names, but they do road shows at Costco. And they've always been really inspiring to me because they met Costco buyers where they are. But they do the road show, so they're at the front of the store. So they don't have to really be at the bargain Costco price, but they came to the buyer where they are, and they found a way to still tell their story. They're, doing over $1 million in sales a year selling African baskets. So innovation and competitive market dynamics are driving the field, and it's actually, people are being successful, which is awesome.
Yeah, I think the perfect situation would be when you just go shopping and buy something without even realizing that it's
Exactly.
a social enterprise.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. It's good quality and it's available, and and that's, I think, everybody who's in this arena, that's the ultimate dream, is that consumers, that all products are held to ethical standards, and we're a long way from that, but there's certainly more and more and more available. And I think the partnership of big corporations is actually starting to really help. Yeah. And, one of my big goals for Sauce is tiny. We're a drop in the bucket in the scheme of things, but we're really trying to demonstrate that we can import and export, and to find the channels to do that in more effective ways. And if we can do that, we can be part of changing the face of manufacturing in Kenya. And, that's one of the reasons that I'm back, is because I want to be a part of larger dialogues, and how do we open up trade channels, and how do we decrease the barrier of entry for a small group? How do we create linkages with other groups so we share containers so that we can, have the benefit of cost-effective shipping, But we don't have the barrier of having to ship 10,000 pieces when we're a tiny, group.
That's a great point. Great point. Yeah. Well, Megan, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
I loved this interview. It was
Oh,
so there's so many tips and knowledge here. I would love to share it.
thanks.